On the eve of exam 2.
The eve of exam 2. I mean, this is all we do is churn out these webisodes.
That's right,
just one after the next.
And we have
round the clock webisodes.
There's the rumor mill is going about the webisodes that episode 7 may feature Chris Garrett's back.
That's what the discussion boards are saying.
We'll see.
But
let us know if you want him back.
Yeah.
I mean, that's I think really kind of where we're
that
at.
will be the next. What do we do?
Make the case.
Make a case.
Yeah.
That'll be the next make a case. And
True or false? Chris Garrett should be back for episode 7.
We'll rip open the envelopes. We'll debate who should have true or false.
All right, Amy, our first topic. The last discussion board was really interesting. Last time we called you guys out, we said, come on, talk to each other on the discussion boards. It was phenomenal. It was all responses, and it was clear you were reading each other's work. That is what these are supposed to be. So A+, great job on that.
And good question, I think. Like it's a engaging idea. It's interesting. It's a good discussion question.
Yeah, and as I looked at the discussions, there were a couple themes that really seemed to come out strong. Those who were opposed to the Benedict option, most of them thought, well, this is a good thing, but. And the but was about the fact that Benedict option sort of feels like it's not engaged enough with the culture. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, for me, and I remember saying in a previous webisode, I'm a bit of a critic of monasticism, and I'm still a bit of a critic of monasticism. And so for me, I think what is difficult about even making the choice to say, I'm going to disengage means that you are in a position of privilege. Like, it's a privileged position to be able to say, guess what? I'm going to remove myself. I'm going to go over here, and I understand that in and of itself is supposed to be making a statement. That is sort of an action of inaction. It can be viewed as sort of inaction, just saying I'm taking myself out of the public sphere. I'm taking myself out of the social conversation. And yet at the same time, I know that it is actually an action. It's supposed to speak to this removal is supposed to speak into and be a rejection of what you see as flawed systems, or what you see as something that is corrupting to like your first identity, which is your religious identity. But I tend to think it does more harm than good.
Can I ask you a question about that? Because I think that's actually really, really interesting to think about sort of a privilege. Does it change if your sort of move away from the culture is not maybe in an Anthony sense, like I am moving away, and more of a Benedictine sense of I'm moving away and come with me, and especially if you're like helping to provide the means for people to do that.
Right.
Now I realize in the Middle Ages, people who became monks were not the peasants. Didn't have that option.
Right, because that makes it sound like it's like come one, come all.
Right,
and it wasn't like that.
But if it was, would that change? I'm just sort of curious how to think about that.
No, because I think it's unrealistic. I think that's unrealistic. Like it's, again, I think that, I don't know, like this is silly. And so, this is a big reach, but I'm going to come back to it. It's like when I hear people who are very adamant in arguments about, say, like the role of women in the church and like, or the role of women actually in like Christian community, that like the best thing for women to do is to stay home and like be with their kids, like no questions asked, like that is the best thing to do. That is such a privileged position that like does not hold up historically. It does not hold up when we transfer it out of like our cultural context, which is a first world country where like we have a lot of social support networks in place and systems and this and that. So I guess I still I think it does not work for like women, and especially like women and children. So to me, it's that piece. Like it isn't a system that I think truly would work for in many cases like our most vulnerable populations. Mm-hmm. So that's why, again, I feel like it's a position of privilege, and there are good things about it. So I think one thing I appreciate is that students, I think you've been doing a really good job, and I say this a lot in my comments on writing. You didn't make this black and white, which I think is great, because none of these things are black and white. And so the right thing to do, I shouldn't say the right thing to do, but the more nuanced answer is one that is like, well, here's the good, but here's like the problems with it. And so I'm sitting here saying I see good things about it, but to me, the benefits do not outweigh the harms. It leaves so many people out. And so when I think of those that are at the most vulnerable parts of our society, I think you're going to be walking down to your Benedict option on the street while those people are saying, where does this leave me? What about us? Maybe in a perfect world, everybody is welcome at the table, but humans have proven they don't do very well with being all inclusive.
Right.
That way.
And my only thought, and this is not really counter to what you're saying, is if we look historically at, and I'm not talking about 6th century Benedictine monasticism, but if we look at monastic orders, some of those orders really are targeted not at receding from the culture, but as creating a means to engage in that culture. So I think about the teachers that and I know actually a number of students also either grew up Catholic, attended Catholic school. So I don't know I went to a school where my teachers were nuns.
Right.
And they were definitely not receding from the culture. They were doing that as a way to engage the culture and actually to serve some of those folks who couldn't be served otherwise.
Right.
Or who weren't being served. So even to that degree, there's a kind of complexity to that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I fully agree, because when I look at sort of modern monastic movements, like I think of like Shane Claiborne and whatever, this sort of return to communal living, it certainly is one that isn't, I mean, it's inward, and yet at the same time, it's about reach out. It's about provision, things like that. Again, I just think, like, I don't know. I mean, if we all do that, who is going to drive the bus to get people to, I mean, like, there's just a lot of infrastructure things that I think, nope, not realistic. Still
I knew
privileged.
Lots of monks and nuns who were bus drivers.
No, you didn't.
I did. Brother Paul Mulligan drove a bus to the
okay,
tennis.
well, I think you get my point.
I totally understand. But
Yes.
But the idea is actually, if
how many do you know are checking you out at the grocery store?
Actually, if literally everybody did it, though, what you'd have is a new society. If everybody did it, but then we get to your realistic argument of like, what are you receding from?
Right.
Right.
So something else we encounter in this unit is the period of the Renaissance. Dr. Gertz is not here. Dr. Gertz is usually, I don't want to say a critic of the Renaissance.
Oh, he is.
Well, he's not a fan of it. I mean, he doesn't
he
doesn't like the Renaissance. He thinks it's one of the most boring topics that we cover. He thinks it's sort of overrated, I guess, or maybe it's just been done. Like there's too much about the Renaissance. So he's not here to badmouth it. Sam, I say we celebrate it.
All right.
Just live it up. I love the Renaissance. I think that it's such an exciting time for social vibrancy, for the explosion of the investment in art, and art that is celebratory, and art that is Platonic in its design, that it is an embracement of human potential, that it highlights the importance of nature, and nature is something to be enjoyed and celebrated as opposed to nature as something to be feared. New types of, although you wouldn't have called them like scientific experimentation, but yet that's what we can look back and call it in terms of how does the human body work? Again, like technology, what are humans capable of? So, I mean, I say go Renaissance.
Right, and if we want to attack Dr. Gertz's position a little bit, what the people of the Renaissance were doing was not just something new. I think when we talk about the Renaissance, we tend to focus a lot on, and actually I was happy with what you said, because you didn't just say, oh, it's art, because it is art. I mean, that's what's on the cover of a book about the Renaissance. But what the Renaissance is about some of these new movements, but it's also about looking backwards. So
renewal,
Chris as a historian, should love the idea that they were saying, there's a history here that we can uncover that actually can maybe help us make a better society. If you like the fact that when we talked in an earlier webisode about how the good American ideals are founded on Greek and Roman notions about what government should look like, right? If you don't have the Renaissance, if you don't have this rebirth, this look back, maybe we don't get to those things. Yeah. So I think if we need to think really broadly about the Renaissance, but that idea of rebirth, of going back to those classical sources. Now we can question, are those the sources we should go back to? But there is a lot you can mine from the past. And Chris, if you want to think historically, you really do need to do some of this ad fontes.
Right. I mean, in 2 years, when you're watching this webisode for the first time.
So
I hope you feel that conviction.
Amy, 2017 was a big year. So we're in 2018 now, but 2017 was a big year.
2018's just been still let down.
But 2017 was a big year for the Renaissance, or for the Reformation, because it was the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther posting his 95 Theses. So sort of thinking about that 500th anniversary, what's the most important legacy of the Protestant Reformation?
Well, we still live we still live in sort of the post-Reformation world. There hasn't been another, at least I guess I mean, I don't see where there's been another movement within the Christian tradition that had the result that the Reformation did. It's sort
not
of
on
there's
that
been
scale.
not on that scale. There's sort of been no going back, right? And so I think the legacy of the Protestant Reformation is the notion of reform, the notion of like you could break apart a system and you could make a change. And so the importance of the notion of pursuit of individual study, reading scripture for oneself. I mean, there haven't been, I mean, I guess I'm just trying to think like some of the foundations of the theological underpinnings of the Reformation. We haven't sort of, quote, seen disproved or dismissed, or do you know what I mean? It's sort of that, and the Protestant so I feel like the Protestant Reformation is kind of an ongoing thing. I mean, because what we've seen is that many of the then denominational splits that are going to come out of the Protestant Reformation, the Reformed tradition, the Calvinist tradition, the Lutheran tradition, eventually the Presbyterian tradition, eventually traditions like the Methodist tradition. I think being born in as the result of that Protestant Reformation, they're kind of in continuous they're like in mini reformations all of the time. And so it's this continuous, if I look at my own tradition, the Methodist tradition, since its creation in the 18th century, it's sort of been like a continuous, what does this need to mean for now? How do we re-engage what this means for now? How do we move forward? How do we answer the questions of today, considering that we're always growing in knowledge? And so I think the lingering impact is just that sort of, you have to sort of constantly be saying, what does this mean for now?
And I think one way to think about it might be, in this preview, something we're going to look at in Unit 3, is that the Reformation wasn't just a shift from we thought about it this way to now this is what we think, but it really was a shift in method to say what is in the same way in the scientific revolution we're going to see a shift in method, and we're still living in that.
Right.
We're living in some ways in the methodology of the Reformation in terms of individuals reading Scripture, but Scripture being an authority. So we're still working on what does Scripture say? Absolutely.
And we're also going to see, I mean, another example of a tradition that is a post-Reformation tradition is the tradition of pietism, to which Bethel is attached. Where you may not know this, students, but Bethel is attached to a denomination. It's called Converge Worldwide. Converge used to be what was called the Baptist General Conference, which is from the Swedish Baptist tradition, and the Swedish Baptist tradition is a pietistic tradition that dates back to the pietism dates back to the 17th century in Europe. And so again, because Dr. Gertz is not here, who is our champion of pietism. I mean, everything from writing books about pietism to pietism t-shirts to just a general love of pie.
And just so you know, like he talked about the Benedict Option, he gave us that question. What was Chris' last book called? The Pietist Option. Yes.
Yeah. So if you're wondering, well, what's the Pietist Option? You can find out and you can read that book.
Available in bookstores.
But yeah, Sam, people think you look a lot like Chris. I mean, as you're really good friends. I do not think that. But if you do look at that picture up there, I mean, your glasses are quite similar.
Yeah. We're the same height.
You're the same height.
Yeah.
You actually have very similar aesthetic styles, I'm going to argue. And so you wanna do your impression of him convincing people that they're pietists, that they should be pietists, or they already are, they just don't know it?
I think that a lot of what Bethel students do, they don't even recognize as pietists. So I'm not going to convince you are a pietist, but I want to think about what are some of the powerful influences, and they're probably part of you. The things that I'm most drawn to, because again, I didn't grow up in a pietist tradition, but I really have been drawn to that, are sort of notions that pietism is not focused entirely on what you think and what you believe. It is not to say that the mind is not part of pietism, but the mind is only a part of pietism. Mm-hmm. It's not focused. The judge of faith is not what you believe. It's not how you articulate your beliefs, but it really is a good pietist would say about how God is acting in your life, how God is transforming your life. So, which points then a little bit more to it's about kind of who you are, and not just what do you do, but who you are at your core. I think in terms of thinking about, we talked about individuals reading the Bible, small group Bible study, things like that are very, very find their roots in pietism and things like that. And I think sort of the idea that as we'll see in Unit 3 when we talk about Blaise Pascal, he has this notion that we know through the mind, but we know through the heart as well. So that sometimes faith is something that's felt, right? And that might be the thing which spurs us to action. That might be the kind of knowledge. So to me, those are if any of those ideas resonate with you, you might be a pietist.
You might well be a pietist.
All right. Amy, last topic for this segment. The second exam is tomorrow.
I can't believe that. It's just like, how are we here again already?
Yes. Any thoughts, any things you want to say to
students?
Yeah,
last time I sat here and I was like, nobody emailed me about not having enough time. And then at that time, I'd had to regrade some exams. And I realized that as I got into their essays, some people were like, I did not have enough time. So I'm not laughing about that, because that breaks, it truly, it breaks my head and my heart when I see the impact of what happens to your grade, even if you got every objective question right, but then it's like, nothing, for the essay. So I guess what I want to say is, please look at that essay first. Even if it's just going and outline, really quick, just be like, here's the 7 things I want to remember when I come back to this, because then if you get in a bind, there's something, it showed me that you were there and that you were working on it. So my advice just really remains the same. Do not spend too much time on those objectives. I know that, again, when you have the ability to go and sort of make sure you're right, there's the impulse to do that, but I actually think you probably know more than you think that you do. And this would be a case of where your gut, which I guess I want to say is a combination of intellect and heart, okay? Your gut response is often actually the right response.
It's a feeling organ.
And then we go and we think, oh, but I want to make sure, and oh, you question yourself, and then there's no time for the writing. Other thing would just be make sure within your essays, be specific. Don't speak generically. Don't say so-and-so was a really important figure. We know they were an important figure. Be specific. Why were they important? What did they do? The essay questions ask you to pay attention to historical context. And if there was one thing I felt like I kept saying that wasn't done, was there's no historical context here. And that doesn't mean you have to go on and on. It means saying something, with Unit 2 as an example, it means saying, Martin Luther, who was a reformer out of the Catholic tradition, in the 16th century, it's just put a little bit in there. Don't operate from the position that your reader knows what you're talking about. So you need to just give some historical context. So that was the main thing I felt like kind of was overlooked a little.
And I'll say the other piece of advice I have, and this really goes to the essays, is make sure when you read the essay question, you're aware of everything it's asking you to do. Because that was the other place where I saw students
you just kind of, it seemed long, you skipped pieces of it.
Like the last essay said, make sure you talk about 2 out of these 3 people. And I would oftentimes write, it's you mentioned Constantine, but what about these other folks? So if you know what the question's asking you to do, that's one of the boxes we're looking to tick.
So it's not a buffet. It's more like when your mom puts the plate of food in front of you and says, you must eat from each of these things.
Eat your veggies.
Eat your veggies. Eat some of everything that's there.
All right. We'll be right back with Food Chain.
Well, all right, everybody. Welcome to our second segment, which is Food Chain. Reminder that this is a great review for your vocabulary terms, quite a bit about significance, because that's why we are choosing them. Also a reminder to you that we are making intellectual arguments here, so we're trying to think about the context of the course. Why do these people matter within the context of the course? So we're thinking about their significance in terms of their contribution to this grand story that we are telling about the development of Christianity in Western culture. So, Sam, I think you are going to start out and take it away with your first choice.
All right, my first choice is Michelangelo.
Oh, all right.
We talked in segment 1 about the Renaissance. I feel like to look at Unit 2, I wanted to have a representative of the Renaissance, and I know I said the Renaissance is about more than just art, but he's sort of a great example of I think the peak of Renaissance art in terms of he embodies that idea of l'uomo universale, the person who's just kind of a person of universal genius. He's probably the greatest sculptor in the Western tradition. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. He embarks on one of the most ambitious painting projects of all time, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. He's one of the chief architects on St. Peter's Basilica, and he's brilliant at all of those things. He also writes. And he's not just creating new. He's going back. He's doing this ad fontes move. So I think it's important as we're thinking about the totality of this unit to have the arts represented and to have the Renaissance represented.
Well, I just want to say ditto. So, This is going to be, I think this is going to be a battle where students, you need to really listen to like the nuance of the differences, because I think there's going to be a lot of overlap, and at the same time there's going to be some subtle differences that need to come into play here. I struggle between choosing Michelangelo or choosing Leonardo da Vinci, overlapping a bit in terms of these things that you mentioned about their contributions, not only to the arts, but the ways in which the work that they were doing, it was in the spirit of ad fontes, this return to the sources, and the sources that we're talking about are Greco-Roman sources. Of art, of literature, of social customs and structures, and philosophical ways of thinking. So yes, like nod to the arts, and again, I think a mutual love for the Renaissance. Despite others who shall go.
If Chris was here, we wouldn't have a Renaissance.
Wouldn't even have a Renaissance person.
All right, next up, I have Thomas Aquinas. We talked about him in Make the Case. I was the defender of Aquinas, although I was given that position randomly. But I really do think if we're thinking about the intellectual life of Unit 2, well, of the Middle Ages, in the Middle Ages there's most of Unit 2, he's the dominant figure. I mean, he's the peak to which the medieval synthesis is building. Yeah. He encapsulates kind of everything that came before it, and he has significance going on after it. I think he embodies all of that. So I won't talk too much about it, but I really think he has to be on this list.
Yeah.
Good night.
I know. Yep, he does. And so let's remember that when I was making the case, my job was to say that like essentially nobody who's come after Aquinas has sort of had the impact of Aquinas. However, it doesn't mean that I don't think that Aquinas is important. Everything that you just mentioned, but also my reason for choosing him is going to build on something else that I'm going to put up here in terms of the ways in which Aquinas was influenced by others and building on the ideas of others. But, obviously this just tells us, Aquinas tells us a lot also about the historical context, that this was a time of relative prosperity. It's the high Middle Ages. Things have become more stable. People are, and when I say people, I mean men here, but like going to university, studying, pursuing truth. Life has gotten much better. And so I think he also, if we think about his story, it also helps us sort of remember the historical context and differentiate from
Avatar for the High Middle Ages.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Very true. All right.
All right. Next up, I have Francis of Assisi. He's one of my favorite. Over the years, we used to not even teach him much in CWC. Over the years, he's become one of my favorite folks. And I actually think this ties into the conversation we had earlier about monasticism, where Francis is somebody who doesn't create a cloistered form of monasticism. Yeah. He takes on a form of life that really is about saying, what are the problems in our society? And I'm going to go try to work on those things. I'm going to say, I'm going to serve the poor. I'm going to take that on. Now, I will grant, if you wanted to be critical of this in the ways you have in monasticism, that comes from he is definitely a person of privilege. He is a male. He's Italian. He's wealthy. Mm-hmm. But I think he inspires an uncountable number of people going forward to do good things in this world.
No, and it's certainly an example of using one's privilege for good,
right.
I guess you could say, and using his wealth for good. No, I mean...
Yeah.
That's a decent choice. But when I'm thinking about people in the what I'll be able to now call the Catholic tradition based on the time frame of my person, I want to talk about Teresa of Avila. She's actually one of my favorite figures, so we encounter her in the Catholic Reformation. She is a reformer. She's someone that we classify as a reformer from within the tradition, meaning that she wants the tradition to change. She's critiquing it. She sees the need for change, but she's saying, don't blow this all apart. And one of the reasons to say don't blow this all apart is because, again, when we break down greater systems and structures, it's usually those that are on the margins who are going to feel the real impact of that. Why I really like Teresa is because as the Protestant Reformation gets underway and we have all these new Protestant denominations, there is no room for monasticism. So here I am going to, I'm showing that I don't just hate all forms of monasticism. There's actually no real role for women. Like women in the Protestant tradition, boom, go away. We're not going to hear from them for quite a while because women really don't have a role and aren't seen as authority figures, aren't seen as really having much of a contribution to make. So she stands out as this continued importance within the Catholic tradition of women being able actually to have a role. And her writings and her prayers that she wrote and her teachings were really respected. And she was a critic of what she saw as abuses, injustices within her own tradition. And one of the things that I think I really like about her, akin to Aquinas here, is that when I read the writings of Teresa, it feels like they're written today. And not that that's all that gives writing value, is to say, oh, does this sound like it could have been written in 2018? However, that to me just speaks to this sort of like transcendency of the work of the Spirit, if you want to say that I can read one of her writings and feel like she understands me, she's speaking to me, and she's helping me think about God in a way that is accessible, in a way that is accepting and loving. And I think all too often we tend to be highly critical of more ritualistic traditions as not having those personal elements. And like, you cannot read her writing without realizing what a very personal, close, loving connection that she felt that she had with God. So
absolutely. And if we can think about these three people, they also embody a really important idea that we sometimes sort of cordon off to one person, which is all three of these people are also mystics. They all have mystical experience. So it's not just Hildegard of Bingen. Teresa, I mean, that's a big part of her story, right?
Exactly.
But we see that in Francis, we see that in Aquinas. So I think they also embody the full scale, the full breadth of medieval spirituality. My number two is Muhammad. And I think he is somebody who we sometimes think about as, we talked about him early in the unit, but he is the core, a core figure to a major world religion. To talk about the most important people from this time period that we talked about in this class and not have him up here, I think we're missing something.
Yep.
Because one of the other pieces we can talk about with Aquinas, we talk about Aquinas and Aristotle all the time, but Aquinas isn't reading Aristotle for Aristotle. Aquinas is reading Aristotle through Averroes, right? So there is this, throughout the Middle Ages, there is this real interaction between Islam and Christianity. So even in the story of Christianity, Islam is so important. So you got to have Muhammad up there.
Well,
look at that.
Made a case for me, because that's exactly what I was going to say, is that when we look at the work of Aquinas, and this is to me what is fascinating about cultures intersecting, is that what sharpens our own, this is going to get into a little bit of Erasmus language here, but what sharpens our own thinking is exposure to the writings, the works, the experiences of others. And so it wasn't from a contradictory place to say, looking at Islam only through the lens of saying, here's where Islam is contradictory to Christianity, here's where it's bad, here's where it's wrong, here's where it's evil. Rather, Aquinas was working with this mindset of, here's this, brilliant scholar, Averroes, from the Islamic tradition. He was, doing the work of, those that were, for Averroes, having a background in both, Arabic as well as Latin, doing translations, making available to Europe many of the writings that had been lost to them, because the Islamic world, which was expanding at the time, was also reading those things and holding on to them and having an appreciation for them in the interesting ways in which Averroes' model provides a model for Aquinas to think about how do we think about God and how do we think about God's role in the world as well as in the universe. And we would not have that, obviously, without Muhammad. And again, that you just look at the historical reach of Islam. Islam is not dying out. And I feel like if this is a history we knew better, if we'd actually done a better job of making this a part of the Christian historical story, we would actually have a far better understanding of the things that are happening today. So really important.
Great. As I look at my list, there is one thing that's missing.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Right. There's one thing that's missing, and that is that there is no real representation of the Protestant Reformation. Yeah. So I'm going to put number one on this board, Martin Luther, for some of the things for some of the things that we talked about in our first segment, right? This idea that the Protestant Reformation and Luther is the person who kicks that off. The Protestant Reformation really works to shift some of that methodology in terms of how we think about how we understand the Bible, how we understand theology, how we understand faith, how we understand salvation. And he's not the end of this process, but he's the beginning of it.
Right.
I guess you could argue other people are the beginning of this, but in terms of thinking about Protestants, and I wanted to have a Protestant on this board because that's a big part of this story. I don't need to make the case that Luther's important. I think we all know Luther's pretty important.
Right. No, you just said it there. Luther is building on the ideas of others, and in particular...
Maybe you have one of those others.
In particular, Luther is building on the ideas of Erasmus. So Erasmus predates Martin Luther He is asking the same
by
questions.
like 10 years.
well, my point is that Erasmus isn't like on Luther's coattails. We often use the sentence that Luther hatches the egg that Erasmus laid, or rather maybe about like Erasmus lays the egg that Luther will then hatch. So Erasmus was asking the same questions. Erasmus had the same critiques of the church. Erasmus, which I love, Weapon for the Christian Warrior, again, one of my favorite readings. Erasmus was really saying, look, secular and sacred, why are we afraid of the secular? Understand that the exposure to, again, others' writings and ideas is what, and these are his words, sharpen us. They're what sharpen our minds. Like, we can't just sort of stay cloistered in our own thinking, our own ideas. They have to mean something when you move them out of your little street, your little community, your little box. And so the thing I appreciate about Erasmus is that Erasmus is also a reformer. He does not start the Protestant Reformation, but that's rather because he, again, like Teresa, is calling for reform from within. He foresaw and said, I just think there's going to be a lot of damage that is done, a lot of problems that are going to be created, and then ultimately it's going to lead to strife, violence, prejudice, and guess what? Check, 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 and check. He's right about all of them. So he is not, he's not a worrywart. He's not like a Chicken Little. Like, everything he predicts is going to happen in turmoil as a result of splitting the church does in fact happen. And so I think sometimes we make this history a little too clean. Like, that's one of the things I like about the course. And actually in the summer course, I feel like we almost can do a better job of it, that we tend to make the story so simple. And it's like, Catholic tradition got corrupted, bad. Protestant Reformation, Luther, good. And then,
right.
And then it's been good ever since. And as we will see going into Unit 3, holy crud, like wars of religion, like this is not a clean history. And a big part of the desire to not, quote, do it was to prevent violence.
Okay.
So
I'm going to point out something I really like about your list, and especially choosing Erasmus. Yes. And then one thing that I feel like is missing from it, which is I love Erasmus is one of my favorite people that we studied in this course. And actually, you also, by having both Erasmus and Michelangelo bookending this, you're pushing for a broad understanding of the Renaissance, because he is a Renaissance figure as much as he's a Reformation kind of figure.
So he's also an ad fontes person.
Yep. So I like that. I do think it's a problem that you have this unit, and this is your representation of the Protestants.
I know you guys always say this to me, but but there's no Protestant Reformation.
I understand that. But I think there's the split between these. The big issue that they split on the most is really the idea of what is Reformation. Is Reformation going to be this thing that we're going to struggle with internally, or are we willing to do the radical move of saying we have to actually break away from this tradition which is holding us down? And that's why I think Luther is significant. Whether he chose to make that decision or whether it was forced upon him, I think that makes him significant enough that I think you kind of have to have someone from that tradition on the list.
Right. And I agree with your point. However, I see Erasmus as sort of representing the two stories. Mm-hmm. It's like he is representing the story that we see carry out with people like Loyola, with people like Teresa, and obviously, again, to this day. So it's like, to me, we look to Erasmus to be, he's like holding Luther's hand and holding the Catholic tradition and saying, like, with me starts sort of the story of both of where these are headed. So,
and maybe a way to make a more perfect list is to say, have him somewhere in this mix take out Michelangelo and say this is our Renaissance person.
Oh yeah,
that's a way to think about
that. That's a good point. So I might need to, except I don't like to ignore the sort of art.
Exactly, and that's why this game's fun, is because you can't have them all up there.
Can't have
but
them
you know
all.
what? Someone needs to decide which list they think is better.
It's not going to be us.
It's going to be you.
Yeah.
So go on to Moodle. We have a poll. Vote on which list you think is better. I think they're both good lists.
I think they're both good lists, too.
I think they both have problems.
I think they both have problems. They're both good lists. Again, it's not black or white, right or wrong. It's just...
But you only get one vote.
But you only get one vote. So don't forget to. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. It's time for happy time. I mean, that is maybe my...
We need some happy in the world.
We do need some happy in the world. Today is July 17th, and this first one is very special to my heart. Happy birthday to Disneyland. It's 63 years, I want to say 63 years young. Today, Chris still has not taken his family to any Disney theme park. Sam, but I kind of want in on this here. Which is better to you, Disneyland or Disney World? But then I also think we should comment on if we've been been to any other
Oh,
Disney
yeah.
parks outside of these.
So
two.
I've been
go
to
ahead.
Disneyland twice,
Yep.
been to Disney World twice,
Yep.
both as a child and as an adult.
I've been to Disneyland 13 times. I've been to
Yes.
Disney World because I grew up closer to there, and I've been to Disney World twice.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to say Disneyland because that's where I went as a kid, and I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it.
But
I will say, I'm going to put my cards on the table. I've been to Disneyland, but I haven't been to the other Disney parks around. So I don't even know what else they have there. Disney World this last time we went with our kids, so I got to really see it through the eyes of my kids who were 10 and 12. And they loved it. So that sort of makes me feel for that. Plus, I thought Animal Kingdom I was not excited about it. I'm like, it's a big zoo. It was amazing. Rad. It was really cool. So I'm going to say that. But I will say this. We also did one day to go to Universal, to go to Harry Potter World. Universal is not as well organized as Disney.
No.
Disney knows how to run these parks.
Disney knows how to run that show.
If they ran Harry Potter World, it would be 25% better.
Interesting. I mean, like a kid spills an ice cream cone in Disneyland within seconds. People emerge,
and those people are wearing mouse costumes.
And those people are, I mean, it's such a well-oiled machine. I love Disneyland. I mean, I grew up going there every summer. My whole family loves Disneyland, except my husband doesn't quite get it. It was funny because I was just on vacation with my sister and my brother-in-law, their kids, and my brother-in-law, and my husband, my sister, and I went off on this big Disney love fest, and both my husband and my brother-in-law were just like, what's the issue here? But love it so much. Enjoy Disney World, but like to me, like Disneyland, that's the purest experience. It's the original.
Where else have you been?
I've been to Disney Sea in Tokyo, which is super interesting. Disney Sea has both like its own. No, it's got its own sort of like sea-oriented park, and then it has Magic Kingdom. So it's got like the Magic Kingdom component, and then it's got the like Disney Sea, which but strangely they just sort of make a lot of the rides from the other Disney theme parks sort of fit into Disney Sea. So for example, no, we're going deep in the weeds, but like the Indiana Jones ride is in like Disney Sea, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Really fun, really enjoyed it, but still, if given the option, would go back to original Disneyland.
All right,
so,
Amy, happy anniversary! The Montreal Summer Olympics, which opened
Yeah,
this day
my
in
favorite
1976.
Olympics.
Neither of us were alive. The Olympics are coming back to this country when LA hosts the 2028 Olympics. Will you be there
to go to Disneyland? I don't know that. I'm. It's funny. I like to be an optimistic person, but I'm also kind of a pessimistic realist. I'm sort of like, if we're all still here, 2028.
Are we going to be doing Olympics in 2028?
Right. I mean, I will be. This is frightening to me. You will be. We will be 50 years old, and that is. I mean, Dr. Gertz will be well beyond that. He'll probably be retired, but that is. So maybe he'll be there. You and I won't be done with work yet, so he can be a on the scene correspondent for us.
Because here's what I would say. What Olympics is it? It's the Summer Olympics. What do we do in the summer? We teach CWC.
Yeah, we're doing this. We're doing this. I tend to actually prefer Winter Olympics. I like this. I like the events better and whatnot. Summer Olympics, I'm kind of like, meh.
And Winter Olympics, the weather's winter, so you're okay sitting inside all day watching people ski. It's great.
It's awesome.
Summer, you don't want to sit inside.
Right. Yeah. And summer doesn't have any sports where you both like use some equipment, but then also shoot things.
Yeah. People make fun of the biathlon. It's kind of awesome.
Biathlon is amazing.
I love it. All right. Happy trails to Evangeline Booth, the first woman to hold the rank of general in the Salvation Army and the namesake of Chris Gertz's daughter. She died July 17th, 1950. We'll meet her parents, the founders of the Salvation Army, in our last museum. Who are you most looking forward to in Unit 3?
Ooh. Well, I mean, I guess an oldie but goodie. I really like talking about the Methodist tradition, so that's probably always what I don't know, like that's what I'm looking forward to, because I continue to kind of really like it and feel like it's really relevant, and so
I'm kind of excited about the scientific revolution. I'm kind of into that now. So Galileo, that's going to be.
Yeah, I also really I probably wouldn't have said that 5 or 6 years ago, but now I also really enjoy the Galileo reading. The Letter to the Duchess Christina is one of my favorite readings. I think it's super interesting. I love the kind of like the intellectual manipulation that's going on in there, and the argument that's being made, and yet at the same time, like the respect that's being offered. I mean, it's like a really well crafted letter.
That's right. I would give
multiple
it an A.
drafts. I wonder like who was helping to read
28 out of 30. There's some, it could be better. Could use better examples.
Yeah.
It's time for the big finish.
Yeah.
Amy, what do we need students to be thinking about?
We need to be thinking about the exam. Like, please do your prep. Don't just because of the open book feature think you can just sit down and approach this like an assignment. The better prepared you are, the more successful you're going to be, the more confident you're going to be.
And vote for Food Chain.
Vote for Food Chain. Yep.
And enjoy the day off after the exam.
Yeah, we will. Well, we'll be grading probably. Hopefully I won't be grading twice this time.